What if Ash met Meowth first in Pokemon I Choose You? G'day everyone, Rune here, and in celebration of AMMF hitting its 1-year anniversary, I've decided to make a special what if based off of Pokemon I Choose You, the movie. I Choose You is an interesting addition to the franchise as it kicked off the alternate universe line of Pokemon movies, and is kind of a mismatch of some of the most well-known parts of the original anime and a new plot, even though the two don't always work together in the end product. Also, like I mentioned in my 500 sub special, AMMF started as a rush job, and thus the start is not something I'm particularly proud of. So I want to fix a few of the problems with my original story and the problems I saw with the original movie while I'm at it. With all that said, let's begin our story. Our story starts the night before our titular hero, Ash Ketchum, is set to begin his Pokemon journey. It is late and he is slowly packing his bag while the TV plays a Pokemon battle silently in the background. Occasionally, he looks up and makes a few mumbled notes about the tactics being used by both trainers before turning back to his packing. After a few moments, a small figure shifts on the bed and Meowth turns over to stare at Ash with sleepy and disapproving eyes. He eyes the bag and the TV before giving a loud yawn and turning back to Ash. Calling Ash kid, as he usually does, he tells Ash that he knows he's trying to be considerate by not having the volume on, indicating the TV, but he's not going to be able to get to sleep until he knows that Ash isn't going to stay up the whole night. Slightly sheepish, Ash apologizes for keeping Meowth up, explaining that he wanted to go over his packing one last time. They're going to be traveling for a very long time, with long stretches where there'll be no civilization for miles. He wants to make sure that they'll have everything they could need before leaving. Besides, it's not like they need to get up early for him to pick a starter from Oak or anything. He and Meowth are a team. The 10-year-old and the Scratch Cat fist bump before Meowth lets his arm hang tiredly off the edge of the bed. He tells Ash that, while they don't need to worry about Ash getting a starter from Oak, they do still need to swing by the lab before they leave in order for Ash to get a Pokedex and some Pokeballs. He also says that Ash's packing was fine the last 5 times, so it'll be fine now, as he turns onto his other side on the blankets with a huff. Now hurry up and get to bed. Don't think I won't scratch you come morning if you're not up at a reasonable hour, kid. Ash gives a roll of his eyes, knowing full well that Meowth can and will carry out that threat if he gets the chance. Turning off the TV, he quickly puts the rest of his things into his bag and the special belt pouches that his mother had bought him for his birthday last year. With that finally done, he crawls into bed and curls up under the covers. With yawns, the boy and Pokemon bid each other goodnight in their traditional way of calling each other slightly insulting nicknames while wishing the other sweet dreams. The next morning comes swiftly, and Meowth wakes to find that Ash is still asleep. Curled under the covers, the only thing of his that's visible is his mop of black hair. Meowth isn't surprised. Ash has always been a heavy sleeper, and he had stayed up late last night with his incessant packing. He grins down at the sleeping boy and extends his claws. He had warned him after all. He makes a swipe at the figure in the bed, only to be startled by a flurry of fabric as Ash flings the covers off and jumps out of bed. Meowth stares open-mouthed as he sees that not only is Ash awake, but he's already dressed. Ash bursts out laughing at the look on Meowth's face, pleased to have gotten one over on the usually observant cat. Meowth, for his part, gives an annoyed huff, but can't fight the fond smile on his face. Once Ash has recovered from his laughter, he quickly picks up his pouches and fastens them to his belt before slinging his backpack over his shoulders. With their supplies secured, he holds out an arm to Meowth, who takes the invitation easily and climbs up the appendage to Ash's shoulder, where he makes himself comfortable. With that, Ash takes one last look around the room that has been his for all his life, bidding it a silent farewell before heading downstairs to see his mum. Delia smiles warmly as she sees her son enter the kitchen, all dressed and ready to start his journey. She fondly remembers a time when Ash had needed her to wake him up in the mornings or else he would sleep the whole day away. This causes Ash to wince, embarrassed at being reminded of how bad his sleeping habits had once been. Delia then pulls the two males into a hug, wishing them luck on their journey and telling them to take care of each other. Returning the hug, they both assure her that they will, and, with a final goodbye, they leave their home for Professor Oak's lab. They soon arrive to find Oak out the front of his lab, giving some of his grass Pokemon some water. Walking up, Ash greets the old professor with a smile. Oak smiles back, bidding both Ash and Meowth good morning before leading them inside, and to the room where he keeps all of the things he prepares for new trainers. Upon entering, Ash sees that all three of the starters have already gone and asks if the other trainers have already come through. Oak confirms with a laugh, telling Ash that they'd all arrived very early in the morning, not wanting to risk missing out on getting a starter. As he begins to fish out the equipment from his drawer, he begins to ramble about how lucky it is that Ash and Meowth had already decided to travel together. With 4 youngsters all starting on the same day, he'd worried that one of them would end up having to leave without a starter. He continues to ramble, but Ash has stopped listening, his attention drawn by a yellow tail poking out of the banisters of the room's loft. It twitches for a few seconds before disappearing out of sight. Ash begins to make his way up the stairs to the loft, wondering if one of Oak's Pokemon had managed to sneak into the building. Reaching the top of the stairs, he's just in time to catch a glimpse of a yellow form ducking under a cloth. Slowly, so as not to spook the Pokemon hiding, Ash approaches the cloth, telling the Pokemon that he's not going to hurt it. Then, kneeling down in front of the cloth, he carefully lifts it, revealing a male Pikachu. The Pikachu eyes Ash suspiciously as his cheeks spark in warning. Ash smiles in what he hopes is a reassuring way as he holds out his free hand to the Pikachu and introduces himself. The gesture surprises the Pikachu, who looks at Ash's hand like it's some alien life form. Then, hesitantly, he places his paw in it and shakes, mumbling a confused, "Nice to meet you," which Meowth helpfully translates. Before the interaction can go any further, Ash hears Oak calling his name below and makes his way down the stairs. To his surprise, Pikachu follows him, stopping right next to him and Meowth when they reach the base of the stairs. This is a shocking sight for Oak, who tells Ash that Pikachu has never gotten so close to anyone aside from Oak himself. He would always electrocute anyone else. Crossing his arms, Meowth asks if any of those other potential trainers had had the good manners to introduce themselves before getting into Pikachu's space. After all, in his experience, new trainers tend to be the most excitable and most likely to act before thinking. And getting in someone's personal space before even saying hi is not the best first impression to make. Ash decides not to make a comment about how he is a new trainer and had the good sense to not invade Pikachu's space. He already knows he's not like others his age. Oak thinks about this for a moment and seems to make a mental note for later, before handing what he'd gathered to Ash. A Pokédex and several Pokeballs. He also hands Ash a rotophone, which his grandson Gary had asked him to give to Ash. Their relationship might not be as close as it was when they were little children, but they had been able to work out their differences after Meowth had forced the two boys to talk to each other. Taking the items with a grateful thank you, Ash tucks them into the pouches at his belt that he'd set aside for them. With their business done, Ash and Meowth bid the Professor and Pikachu goodbye and head to Route 1. Soon, the two find themselves walking down Route 1, though Ash can't help but feel like he's forgotten something back home. Exasperated, Meowth tells him to stop agonizing over it. He's checked his packing 6 times, and Meowth knows for a fact that Ash packs like he's going on a 3-day hike even if he's just going to the grocery store. Whatever Ash thinks he's forgotten, it clearly wasn't that important. Now Ash needs to stop thinking about what's back home and start focusing on what's in front of him, or... At that moment, Ash's foot catches on something hidden in the tall grass they're walking through, causing him to fall flat on his face and elicting a sigh from Meowth. Or else that will happen. Pushing himself up on his hands, Ash looks behind him to see what he'd tripped over. Right there, next to his foot, is a Pidgey, its wing hanging limply next to it as it stares at Ash with frightened eyes. Seeing the obviously injured Pidgey, Ash hastily rights himself, apologizing to the small bird for tripping over him and asking if he can see his wing. After receiving the go-ahead from Meowth, Ash slowly reaches out to the wing, taking it gently in his hand as he looks it over. It's clear at a glance that the wing wasn't injured from Ash tripping over Pidgey. The wound is at least a few hours old and is surrounded by small burns and scorch marks. Fire types aren't native to this area, so the only way that Pidgey could have gotten that injury is if it had come across the pallet trainer that had chosen Charmander. But why would a trainer just leave this poor Pokemon in such a state, rather than taking it to a Pokemon Center to get healed? Had they not noticed how hurt it is? Shaking his head, he focuses back on the matter at hand. He is not the best with medical stuff, but he's good enough at first aid to treat Pidgey's wing until they can get him to a Pokemon Center. Opening up the pouch he uses for medical supplies, he pulls out a burn heal and a roll of bandages before treating the wound with care. Once it's wrapped, he apologizes for not being able to do anything more for Pidgey's wing and asks if he's okay with Ash carrying him to the Pokemon Center. Having come to trust that Ash at least wants to see him healed, Pidgey agrees and they continue on their way to Viridian. Not long after, however, the sky grows dark and rain begins to pour down in a torrent of rain. Using his jacket to shield Pidgey's wing, Ash looks around for somewhere they can take shelter. Spotting a giant tree in the distance, he directs Meowth to it and they make a break for it. As they reach it, they see that the tree's roots have risen from the ground, creating a small cave, which they use for shelter. As they shelter there, they are soon joined by several small Pokemon, also seeking shelter from the storm. Seeing the Pokemon wet and shivering, Ash digs in his bag before pulling out several blankets, which he drapes over the Pokemon to help keep them warm. Looking around, Ash is distinctly reminded of something from long ago, causing him to let out a chuckle. Meowth looks at him, eyebrow raised in question. The only answer Ash gives is a simple deja vu, but it's enough for Meowth to understand and give a chuckle of his own. Eventually, the storm slows to a stop and they all climb out from under the tree, Ash still carrying Pidgey. They look around to see the bright orange glow of the sunset. Seeing how late it is, Ash is about to suggest that they get moving when a loud caw sounds overhead. Looking up, Ash is amazed to see a giant bird Pokemon with feathers in all the colours of the rainbow. As it flies over them, a single feather falls from it, floating down to land in Ash's free hand. Ash looks from the feather to the Pokemon flying away. Hearing Meowth snicker beside him, he looks down and asks what's so funny. Meowth, still snickering, explains to the 10-year-old that he'd heard Ho-Oh as it passed. The way it spoke made it sound like one of those prophets from the really hammy movies, but from the gist of it, it sounded like Ho-Oh was challenging Ash to come find it. Ash looks from the feather back to Meowth and grins. What do you say? Challenge accepted? Meowth simply smiles as they turn and make their way down the road to Viridian. By the time they arrive in Viridian, it's long past dark and Nurse Joy is very surprised to find such late arrivals. After getting an explanation about Pidgey's wing, she quickly takes him to one of the hospital rooms to be healed and insists that Ash and Meowth rest the night in one of the guest rooms. The next morning, Pidgey is completely healed and flying around easily. Ash asks if he'd like them to walk him back to Route 1, but is surprised when Pidgey explains, with Meowth's help, that he is not actually from Route 1. He was passing through it with his flock when they ran into a trainer with a Charmander. The trainer had spotted a member of their flock with different coloration and had wanted to add her to his team. In the confusion and chaos that ensued, his wing had been hit by a stray ember and he'd been separated from his flock. He has no idea where they might be now. Feeling bad for Pidgey, Ash offers for him to travel with him and Meowth, reasoning that with them travelling the entirety of Kanto, they're sure to find something about Pidgey's flock. Pidgey happily accepts and Ash holds out a Pokeball to him, explaining that it'll make sure that other trainers don't catch him by mistake. As soon as the ball lets out a burst of stars, Ash lets Pidgey out. Seeing this, Meowth turns to Ash, eyebrow raised in silent question. Ash just shrugs. If Meowth doesn't like being in a Pokeball, then he has no reason to assume that Pidgey would be okay with it. Meowth shakes his head with a soft chuckle. Continuing on their journey, the now group of 3 soon find themselves in Viridian Forest. where they stumble upon a group of men and women wearing black uniforms emblazoned with bright red R's. Sensing trouble, Meowth makes them hide behind a tree as they observe what they're doing. They soon see the group begin to place dozens of eggs lined up on the ground into large wooden crates. Realizing what's happening, Ash quickly fishes out his rotophone and hits speed dial. As soon as he hears Officer Jenny answer, he gives a quick, whispered report of what he's seeing. He hears the rustle of paper and the thud of frantic feet as Jenny begins to get everyone in the station moving. She tells Ash to stay on the line and not engage the poachers. However, that soon becomes an impossible request as Ash sees that one of the crates that had been sealed before he arrived is about to be strapped to one of the poachers' Rhyhorns. If he doesn't do something now, the eggs in that crate will be taken away and there will be little to no chance of getting them back. Looking up at Pidgey, he asks if he thinks he can cut through the ropes with air cutter. After mulling it over for a few seconds, he nods and jumps off Ash's hat to fly straight at the crate. As soon as he's in range, he flaps his wings harshly, creating several blades of compressed air that slice through the ropes binding the crate to the Rhyhorn. Realizing what's just happened, the poacher directs his Rhyhorn to take Pidgey out with a rock throw, only for it to be blindsided by Meowth smacking it with Iron Tail. Realizing that these Pokemon aren't normal, the other poachers bring out their own Pokemon intent on capturing them. Meowth and Pidgey run back to Ash, leading the poachers away from the eggs. Once they're at what feels like a safe distance, Ash emerges from the trees and calls for Meowth to use their special move. Dark Thunder! Grinning, Meowth turns back to the poachers. Then he focuses his power into two moves at once, Thunderbolt and Dark Pulse. Upon unleashing them, the two attacks merge into one, creating a storm of purple-black lightning, which knocks out both the poachers and their Pokemon. Seeing this, Meowth huffs and comments that they're not very tough for criminals. Ash reasons that they probably didn't expect to run into any properly trained Pokemon, and had only planned for the wild ones that live in the area. Together, the group tie up the criminals and return their Pokemon so that they can't cause any more trouble before the authorities arrive. When they do, Jenny lectures Ash and Meowth about running into danger the way they had, but does concede that if they hadn't, at least one of the crates would have been lost. During the returning of the eggs to their very relieved parents, it's discovered that one of them doesn't belong to any of the Pokemon in the area. It's a 3-colored egg, with red on the top, grey in the middle, and black on the bottom. And Jenny can't find it in the book listing all of the Pokemon that live in the forest. Even after Meowth asks around, its parents can't be found. The only explanation that they can think of is that it's from a previous raid that the poachers had done and had left in the crate by mistake. Ash asks what's going to happen to it, and Jenny explains that they'll need to find a trainer to take it in, as they don't have the resources to do an international search for its parents. There's a pause before Jenny asks if Ash knows anyone with an egg care license. Ash says that he has one and knows of a few others that got their licenses at the same time as him. Jenny smiles and says that that's perfect before placing the egg in Ash's arms. Since he's the one that stopped the poachers, and he already has a license, she can't think of anyone better to take care of the egg. Ash's mouth drops open in shock, but he can't bring himself to say no. Several days later, the group are having lunch in a park when Ash feels the egg move in his lap. Looking down, he sees it glow faintly and realizes it's about to hatch. Hastily, he puts his sandwich down, but before he can move to place the egg on more stable ground than his lap, it bursts into a bright light. Temporarily blinded, Ash stays as still as possible, not wanting to accidentally knock the tiny life in his lap onto the hard ground. When he's finally able to open his eyes, he looks to see two ruby red eyes looking up at him quizzically. Ash takes in the appearance of the Pokemon in front of him. Their fur is mostly chocolate brown with bright, almost iridescent blue highlights, but they have a puff of black fur around their neck. Ash recognizes this Pokemon from his dex cards. She's a Zorua, a shiny one. Zorua blinks up at him before her eyes sparkle with joy and she nuzzles him, giving a soft cry. Whatever she says causes Meowth to snicker and Ash rolls his eyes. He can already guess what she said and doesn't see how it's so funny. Zoroark's only just been born, of course she's going to think that the first thing she sees is her parent. Wanting to make sure that their newest addition is alright, they rush to the nearby Pokemon Center. Nurse Joy gives the baby Zoroark a quick but thorough inspection. Once she's done, she tells Ash that he must have taken exceptional care of her as an egg, as she's never seen a Pokemon more healthy and full of energy. Ash is very relieved that the less than optimal conditions of her hatching had not had a negative effect on her, and decides to call his mother to let her know that the baby has finally hatched. Dahlia is very enthusiastic over the newest addition to their little family, and asks if Ash has named her yet. This confuses Ash, as he hasn't named Meowth or Pidgey, so he doesn't see why he'd name Zoroark. Dahlia points out that Meowth is an adult and Pidgey is a teenager by Pokemon standards. They're old enough to decide names for themselves, but Zoroark is a baby. Moreover, she's a baby that sees him as her daddy. He's the one that needs to name her. Blinking in slight bewilderment, Ash has to admit that that does make some sense. Looking down at the baby in his arms, he thinks for a moment before smiling. How's about Ruby? A few days later, the group find themselves walking through yet another forest, much to Ash's exasperation. He really hates that his sense of direction is so bad. Stopping in a slightly clearer area, he takes out their map and begins trying to figure out where they are and where they need to go. While he's doing this, Ruby's attention is drawn to a bush covered in flowers. Trotting up to it, she gives the flowers a sniff, taking delight in the sweet fragrance. Before she can move to look for more flowers, the bush rustles and a Scyther pops out of the top, glaring down at her. Giving a cry of fear, she turns and flees as the Scyther takes a swing at her. Before it can reach her, however, a feathery form slams into it, sending it stumbling backwards. Ruby runs into Ash's arms as he rushes to her, eyes darting from Ruby to where the Scyther is now battling Pidgey. As soon as he has hold of Ruby, he calls for Pidgey to hit Scyther with Air Cutter. Pidgey does so, sending Scyther sprawling and convincing it that this is one battle it's not going to win. With hasty steps, the Scyther flees, and Pidgey lands in front of Ash and Ruby. Before Ash can ask if he's okay, Pidgey bursts into bright light. Within seconds, Pidgey is gone, and in his place is Pidgeotto. Ash smiles, congratulating Pidgeotto on his evolution and thanking him for saving Ruby. Meowth pipes up, saying that there's a Pokemon Center not far from where they are, and they can get Pidgeotto checked. Taking the map with a grateful nod, Ash shoves it back in his bag before following Meowth down the path he'd indicated. After a few minutes, they arrive at the Pokemon Center, and Ash has Pidgeotto checked by Nurse Joy. After a few minutes, she comes back and Ash lets Pidgeotto out of his Pokeball. Joy can't help but comment on how uncommon it is for a trainer to have so many of their Pokemon out at once, before she's distracted by another trainer. Walking away from the desk, Ash decides that they should take the opportunity to ring his mother. Sure, they have the rotophone, but it still wasn't the same as talking to his mother face to face. Picking up after only the second ring, Dahlia is very happy to see the group. She asks Ash if he's managed to get any more gym badges since they last spoke, and he tells her that he'd gotten the rainbow badge a few days ago. That makes 3! Oh, Ash, I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Mom. She then asks if they've had any more run-ins with those poachers that she'd heard about from the police. This causes Ash to jump and shift his eyes nervously, asking when she'd heard about that. She tells him that Jenny had called her about it the day it happened. She knows that Ash didn't say anything because he didn't want her to worry, but she's his mother. She's going to worry even if nothing's wrong. Unbeknownst to Ash, behind him, a young girl is rolling her eyes at the exchange between mother and son. Her attention is then caught by Joy, who is handing her back a Pokeball. She takes it with a grateful thank you and is about to leave when her eye catches a poster sitting on the desk. It shows 3 individuals. 2 humans wearing white uniforms with red R's on them, and a Porygon. Joy explains that they're members of a group known as Team Rocket. They've become more active lately and had been caught attempting to poach some Pokemon eggs from a forest just outside of Viridian. If it weren't for a young trainer that had happened to be passing through the area at the time, who knows what would have happened to those poor eggs? Hearing that, the girl's eyes drift back to Ash, who's still talking to his mother. He holds Ruby in his arms while Meowth sits on his backpack with his back against Ash's head, and Pidgeot sits on one of the dividers separating the line of video phones. To her left, 3 figures are also eyeing the raven-haired boy, wondering if he's the one who had wrecked the operation in Viridian Forest. At that moment, a young boy comes stumbling through the doors of the center, a Vaporeon in his arms. Ash watches in concern as the boy runs to Joy, asking her to help Vaporeon. Shocked, Joy asks him what happened, and the boy says that Entei had come out of nowhere. He was sure that they could catch it, but in the end they only succeeded in getting Vaporeon hurt. Frowning slightly, Ash turns back to his mom. He's sorry, but he's going to need to cut this short. Delia waves him off, telling him to just be careful that his big heart doesn't get him in too much trouble. Ignoring that comment, Ash hangs up and rushes over to the trainer. He asks him if he'd heard him right, and the boy confirms. Then, to the surprise of everyone present, Ash asks if Entei had seemed agitated when he encountered it or if it was hurt. One of the trainers listening demands to know why that's important, and Ash feels his temper flare slightly. Shooting the trainer a mild glare, he calls him an idiot before explaining. Entei is a Johtonian legendary, and this forest is right bang smack in the middle of Kanto. So why in the whole wide world would Entei be here? Why would it come all the way out to the boonies of an entirely different region unless something was seriously wrong? With an irritated huff, Ash sprints for the door, calling Pidgeot, who'd still been sitting on the divider. Opening the door, he lets Pidgeot go first before running out himself, intent on finding Entei and making sure it's okay. So focused on his goal, he doesn't even notice that he's being followed. After several long minutes of running and looking, Ash hears Pidgeot call overhead and looks up. Gliding over Ash and the others, Pidgeot tilts his head to the right. Ash looks, and there, standing on a rock, looking majestic and calm, is Entei. Relief rushes through Ash as he sees that he's the first to have spotted it. He's a lot more likely to be able to open a dialogue with the legendary beast if there's no one else around to pick a fight with it. That relief is soon dashed, however, as he hears a girl's voice to his left proclaiming that there it is. Looking, Ash sees a girl about his age, with brown hair tied up in a kind of ponytail atop her head. Sensing his eyes on her, she looks to see Ash standing next to her. There are a few seconds of stunned silence, then the girl gives a smug grin and runs toward Entei, calling out her plip-plop as she goes. Ash gives a groan of annoyance and disappointment as he begins to run too. Why are so many trainers attack first, ask questions maybe later? Catching up to the girl, Ash asks her what she thinks she's doing. She shoots him a bewildered look and asks what he thinks he's doing. This is a legendary Pokemon and she's going to catch it, and here he is trying to get in her way. Ash grits his teeth in annoyance and is about to make an angry comment when the girl calls for her Plip-Plop to attack Entei with Bubble Beam. To Ash's amazement, Entei easily dodges it, leaping over him and landing right behind him. Turning to face the legendary Pokemon, Ash feels slightly intimidated with how much bigger it is compared to him. Swallowing down his nerves, he asks Entei if he needs any help. There's a moment of silence as Entei simply looks at him with piercing eyes, making Ash feel as if it's looking at his very soul. The moment is broken, however, as another round of Bubble Beam comes flying from behind Ash at Entei. The attack likely would have hit him, and Ruby as a byproduct had Entei not lightly pushed Ash out of the way before evading the attack itself. Leaping back to the stone it had been standing on, Entei looks down at the two trainers before it, assessing their positions. Then, it launches a flamethrower in the direction of the girl. Ash watches in awe as he gets back to his feet. With how strong that attack is, Entei could easily cover the entire clearing with it. And yet, it seems that Entei is taking care to keep it away from where Ash and his Pokemon are standing. As the fire dissipates, Entei turns and jumps off of its rock, seemingly about to take its leave, only for its way to be blocked by another trainer. This one is a boy with dark green hair, his Lucario already preparing an Aura Sphere. Entei takes the Aura Sphere dead center but is completely unfazed. It then launches a flamethrower at Lucario, sending it crashing into the tree behind it. Seeing this as her opening, the girl calls for her Piplup to use Bubble Beam again, only for Entei to dodge it. Landing with such force that Ash can feel the ground shaking, Entei unleashes a roar so powerful it sends up dust and knocks down both the girl and the boy. Ash turns his body and braces, preparing to shield Ruby from the impact of the roar. After a few seconds of nothing, Ash turns back to see Entei looking at him. Then, without a word or gesture, it turns and leaves. Ash stands there completely stunned and with more questions than ever. Entei was definitely not hurt, what with how fast and easily it had been moving throughout the whole battle. It also hadn't seemed all that agitated, even when the other two trainers had started trying to fight it. So, if nothing is wrong, why is it here? He's brought out of his thoughts by the girl getting in his face and glaring at him. Angrily, she shouts at him that he let Entei get away. Ash rolls his eyes. Did this girl seriously think she was intimidating? Fixing her with an unimpressed look, he gives her a straightforward, duh. Of course he let Entei get away. In what universe is giving a 10-year-old a Pokemon that powerful a good idea? If anything, it's a disaster waiting to happen. He also tells her to stop yelling and get out of his face as she's scaring Ruby. The girl ignores him, instead choosing to demand his name. Usually, it's considered good manners to introduce yourself before demanding someone else's name. But I'm Ash, from Pallet Town. The girl introduces herself as Verity and demands a battle before turning to the boy behind her, who is looking over his Lucario. She calls over to him that as soon as she beats Ash, she's coming for him next. Ash rolls his eyes, asking if this is a Pokemon battle or a temper tantrum. Meowth gives him a look and makes a comment about glass houses. The boy, who introduces himself as Sorrel, seems about as enthusiastic about having a battle with the demanding girl as Ash. Returning his Lucario, he tells Verity that he's not interested before turning to leave. Before he goes too far, however, he tells them that they should start looking for some shelter. It's going to start raining soon. Ash frowns worriedly up at the sky. He's not really in the mood to be caught in a storm today. Turning to Meowth, he asks if he remembers the way back to the center, completely ignoring Verity's indignant shout behind him. Meowth shakes his head. They'd run so far into the forest that even his sense of direction has gotten turned around. Heaving a sigh, Ash guesses that they're just going to have to look for some shelter in the forest. Refusing to give Verity the satisfaction of having her childish behavior acknowledged, Ash turns and begins to walk away with his Pokefan. Unfortunately for him, Verity is not so easily deterred and follows him, demanding that he give her a battle. Ash, however, continues to ignore her. Now really irritated, Verity switches tactics. Remembering the call that Ash had been having with his mother back at the center, she attempts to use it as ammo to mock him, calling him a mama's boy that needs his mother's constant attention. This does get a response from Ash, though not the one she wanted. Do I smell jealousy? Gritting her teeth, Verity huffs indignantly and turns to storm off. However, as she takes her first step, she steps on the long vine of a Victory Bell, causing it to jump with a cry of pain before rounding on the girl. Verity stares up at the giant Pidgeot plant as it glares down at her. However, before Victory Bell can lunge at her, Ash is standing between them. With Meowth acting as translator, Ash is able to calm the angry Victory Bell down and convey Verity's apology. With Victory Bell appeased, it hops off to find somewhere else to sleep. With a sheepish smile, Verity thanks Ash for saving her. She says that Ash may be weird, but he seems to know what he's doing. It's at this moment that the rain begins to fall, drawing everyone's attention. Clicking his tongue, Ash places Ruby on Pidgeot's back before he turns to Verity and says that they should start running. During their mad dash for shelter, Ash spots something out of the corner of his eye. He skids to a stop and turns to see a small, female Eevee sitting on a rock, unmoving as rain soaks her fur. Even from their distance, Ash can see that the Eevee is dangerously thin. Dashing over, he pulls off his jacket as everyone follows close behind. He holds his jacket over her in order to shield her from the rain, and is about to ask what she's doing out here when her ears perk up and she gives a happy yip. Ash watches in shock as the Eevee jumps from her rock and bounds over to a red-haired trainer approaching with a midnight Lycanroc. Next to him, Verity says in a relieved voice that must be Eevee's trainer. Ash wishes he could share in her relief, but he can't shake the bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. Eevee runs up to the red-haired trainer and nuzzles his leg affectionately, only for him to kick her away. The moment that happens, Ash is on his feet and walking towards him at a swift but steady pace. Meowth watches him go with a worried frown. This won't end well. Ash barely hears the trainer's voice as he sneers at Eevee, telling her to get lost already. His attention is then drawn to Ash as he gets close, asking him what he wants. Instead of answering, Ash grips the redhead's shoulder. In one swift motion, he drives his knee into the trainer's stomach, using the hand on his shoulder as an anchor. The boy collapses to his knees as soon as Ash releases him, coughing and holding his stomach. His Lycanroc stiffens, about to attack, only to freeze as it looks at Ash. The redhead, confused as to why his Pokemon isn't attacking, looks up to glare at Ash, only for his blood to run cold and his eyes to widen in instinctual fear. Ash's face is a mask of complete calm, but his eyes are molten orbs of pure malice and hate. Every fiber of his being is screaming, "Run!" but he can't bring himself to move. In a voice so cold it could freeze lava, Ash tells the redhead that people like him make him sick. People that view Pokemon, living, breathing creatures, as nothing more than tools to be used and discarded, are the lowest form of scum. In a just world, people like him would never be trusted with a Pokemon. But, sadly, they don't live in a just world. So the next time Ash sees the redhead's face, he better have shaped up, or Ash will personally make sure that he never hurts another Pokemon again. With that, he turns away from the trainer and walks over to where Eevee is still lying in the mud. With the trainer no longer in his sight, Ash's demeanor and tone completely change. His body language instantly becomes more relaxed, and his voice becomes soft and soothing. Kneeling down, he picks up Eevee gently, holding her like he would Ruby. In a voice as soft as a whisper, he tells her that she's going to be okay now. Recovering some of his bluster, now that Ash has turned off the murderous intent, the trainer gets back to his feet. Sneering at the back of Ash's head, he mocks him for showing compassion to her. He tells Ash that she's a useless failure that can't even evolve. He's given her every evolution stone he could find, and it never did anything. There's a moment of silence before Ash turns his head slightly, making sure that the trainer can hear him without Ash having to see his face. He knows that if he sees it right now, he'll completely lose it, and he'd rather the others not see that. He asks what the trainer's name is, and he tells him it's Cross. I see. Well, Cross, I wouldn't expect someone like you to understand. After all, you did just admit that you only tried the stones. Without waiting for a reply, Ash gets to his feet. Without looking at him, he calls for the others to follow him, saying that they need to find shelter. As Pidgeot flies up to him, Ruby still on his back, Ash asks him to scout ahead of them so that they can find the place quicker. When he does, make sure it's safe and leave Ruby there in the dry before coming back to show them the way. With a nod of understanding, Pidgeotto does just that, while Ash, Verity, and Meowth trail behind. After several minutes of running through the downpour, Pidgeotto comes back and leads the group to a cave. There, they find Sorrel, who is in the process of drying Ruby when they come in. Seeing her daddy, Ruby jumps out of the green-haired boy's lap and runs over to them, bringing a small, tired smile to Ash's face. Close behind her is Sorrel, whose eye immediately catches the Eevee in Ash's arms. An Eevee he's certain Ash didn't have earlier. Looking at Ash, he asks what happened, and Ash tells him that they'll explain later. Right now, they need to help Eevee, and he asks if Sorrel thinks he can do anything for her. Nodding in understanding, Sorrel leads the group to the fire he'd started earlier. Once they're in the warmth of the fire, he gathers everything he needs and begins to make a food mix of various nuts and berries with high energy and nutrient content. As he works, he asks why Ash thought he might be able to help. Ash looks at Sorrel's Lucario and says that the way Sorrel had checked him for injuries was just how he'd seen Professor Oak check the Pokemon at his lab. So there was a good chance that he at least had more medical know-how than Ash. An amused smile twitches Sorrel's lips before he begins to feed Eevee the mix. As he does this, he asks how the group had come across her and is told about the run-in with Cross. After the whole altercation is explained, he gives a nod before commenting that, while he thinks Ash's actions were a little rash, he can't say they weren't warranted. When the last of the mix is gone, he tells them that they'll need to keep Eevee warm. With how malnourished she is, her immune system is going to be compromised. Ash immediately begins to dig in his bag, very grateful that he decided to shell out the extra money for the waterproof one. Pulling out a large fluffy blanket, he wraps it around Eevee before pulling her into his lap. Seeing this, Ruby jumps into his lap and curls up against Eevee, wanting to help keep her warm. This gets smiles from everyone present. The rain continues, and everyone waits to see how Eevee will be come morning. During this time, Verity asks why Ash had compared Sorrel to Professor Oak. Sorrel tells her that it's not that surprising. His goal is to become a Pokemon professor, so it's not surprising that there'd be some similarities in how they act. If anything, it's more surprising that Ash was able to pick up on it the way he did. Ash dodges the comment by asking what field of research Sorrel is planning on specializing in, to which Sorrel explains that his current goal of research is legendary Pokemon. He then turns the conversation to Verity, asking why she's so far from home. Verity, somewhat nervously, tells him that it's a long story, before asking Ash why he's out here. Ash blinks at the question, then smiles. He tells them that he's looking for something to aspire to. At their confused faces, he elaborates. He honestly doesn't really know what he wants to do or be yet, aside from wanting to meet and help as many Pokemon as he can. He does love battling, but he's not sure he's good enough to make a career out of it. He knows he doesn't have the chops to be a doctor, or the head for figures to be a professor. That's why he started his journey. He wants to see as much of the world as he can, and through that, discover who he truly is and wants to be. At that moment, a gust of wind blows through the cave, causing everyone to shiver. Noticing the movement, Meowth and Pidgeotto curl up into either side of Ash, sharing their body heat as Ruby remains in his lap with Eevee. Seeing this, Piplup runs over to Verity and plops himself in her lap, trying to do the same. Shaking his head, Sorrel returns Lucario, telling the other two trainers that they should do the same. While Verity does return Piplup, Ash just laughs while indicating the line of Pokeballs at his belt, covered in stickers and one in particular more than a little scuffed up. The day I make any of these guys go into their Pokeballs, run for the hills, because the end of the world will be coming. Ash explains that he only uses Pokeballs to make sure that other trainers don't accidentally catch his family members. This statement surprises Verity and Sorrel, who have never heard anyone so openly call their Pokemon their family before. Before they can ask about it, Piplup and Lucario pop out of their Pokeballs, determined to stay outside with their trainers. It's at this moment that Entei enters the cave, followed by several small Pokemon. The group watches in stunned silence as it walks to a stone platform not far from them and sits, steam coming off its body as its inner fire dries its wet fur. Ash absently wonders if Entei had taken these Pokemon under its wing, and if that's why it's in this forest. Before he can think on it further, Sorrel asks if he or Verity know about the legend of how Ho-Oh had created Entei. Yeah, the legend of the burnt tower, right? Meowth told it to me when I was a little kid. Well, care to fill me in? Because I'm completely lost here. Giving a chuckle, Ash explains to Verity that it said, hundreds of years ago, the people of Ecruteak Town built 2 towers in honor of 2 great protector Pokemon. One was the Guardian of the Sea, Lugia. The other was Ho-Oh, the Guardian of the Rainbow. However, around 150 years ago, a storm hit the city and lightning struck one of the towers, engulfing it in flames. 3 Pokemon that remain unidentified to this day were trapped inside. Rain, said to be summoned by Lugia in an attempt to save the tower and the Pokemon, put out the fire, but it was too late to save the tower or the Pokemon. So, Ho-Oh breathed new life into them, granting them new forms. Some say that these forms are reflections of the Pokemon that they had once been, while others say that their new forms are representations of the events of their deaths. No one really knows, and anyone that might have been able to give an educated guess is long gone by now. Finishing the story, he gives a slight shrug, taking care not to jostle Eevee too much, and smiles at a memory from not long ago. Almost completely to himself, he says that, whatever the truth is, Ho-Oh is still an amazing sight. Verity and Sorrel stare at Ash in shock as Verity asks him if he's really seen it. Ash blinks, only just realizing what he's just admitted. But, feeling he can trust these two, he explains what happened on the first day of his journey while pulling out the rainbow-coloured feather from its belt pouch. Seeing the feather, Sorrel explains to the group the story of the Rainbow Wing and the Rainbow Hero. This explanation causes Ash to eye the feather warily, then blink in confusion. Are the colours of the feather slightly duller now, or is it a trick of the light? Ash's obvious apprehension draws confused looks from his new friends. I'm not so sure how I feel about all that. Usually when a something or other hero is mentioned in stories and myths, it's because something bad is going to happen. Don't be such a pessimist, Ash. I'm not a pessimist, I'm cautious. There's a difference. With that, the two 10-year-olds devolve into lighthearted bickering, completely oblivious to the group of 3 spying on them from behind a pile of rocks. Jesse, James, and Porygon slip back into cover and into a group huddle. They've confirmed already that Ash is definitely the one that put the kibosh on the Viridian Forest operation, and have been waiting for a chance to get revenge for their organization. This rainbow ring sounds like the perfect opportunity to put the twerp in his place. And nab a primo Pokemon for their boss to boot. Jessie says that they swipe it now, but Porygon and James look at her like she's crazy. Slightly annoyed at their lack of shared enthusiasm, she demands to know what they're waiting for. James asks if she's forgotten what Ash had done to Cross as Porygon nods its head, giving some nervous cries. Instantly, Jessie understands. Ash had been terrifying in that moment. A direct confrontation with the kid would be a mistake. Quickly, she formulates a new plan. They follow the Twerp squad and they will lead Team Rocket right to Ho-Oh. The Twerps do all the work, Team Rocket gets all the reward. Eventually, the hour grows late and the group of children and Pokemon fall soundly asleep, completely unaware that they've gained some new tag-alongs. One of which is much closer than one might think possible. The next morning, our group of heroes wake to find that Entei and his friends have already gone. Ash is a little sad that he still couldn't have a proper conversation with Entei, but he's glad that the legendary seems to be fine. Seems his worry was unfounded. His thoughts are then cut off as he feels the 2 balls of fur in his lap start to wake. Ruby gives a yawn and jumps out of Ash's lap to stretch, while Eevee takes a little longer to wake. Opening her eyes, she looks up to see Ash and smiles. Smiling back in relief, Ash asks if she's feeling better, while helping her out of the blanket. Walking over, Sorrel looks Eevee over before giving a nod of satisfaction. She's going to need to get her weight back up, but she's out of danger for now. Ash frowns in thought before turning his full attention on Eevee. Hey Eevee, why don't you come with us? Our family may be a little crazy and we can be a little dysfunctional at times. But if you want, you can be a part of it. Meowth grins, pride radiating off of him like a furnace. He thinks that that's a great idea. Pidgeotto and Ruby also voice their agreement. Eevee looks at them in shock before her head lowers slightly, her mind going back to the image of Cross's back as he walks away from her. She looks back up at Ash, his words echoing in her head and making her heart feel warm. Smiling, her eyes fill with determination and she gives a firm nod before jumping into Ash's arms in a hug. Their hug is soon joined by Meowth, Ruby, and Pidgeot as the family welcomes their newest member. After Ash has gone through the formality of catching Eevee and letting her out of her Pokeball, the group make their way outside. Just outside the cave, they spot the beautiful sight of a rainbow hanging high over the mountains far in the distance. As they admire it, Ash notices that the pouch in which he keeps the rainbow wing is glowing. Quickly, he pulls out the feather and holds it up before moving it slightly to the left towards the end of the rainbow. The group watches in astonishment as it begins to shine brightly. Sorrel explains that, according to the legend, the rainbow wing is meant to guide the rainbow hero to Ho-Oh. Looking at the map on his mini-computer, he tells the group that the Ryzen mountain range is in the direction that the rainbow wing seems to be pointing. Smiling with a slightly exasperated sigh, Ash guesses that it would be rude to not follow along with this after Ho-Oh went through all the trouble of dropping the rainbow wing for Ash to pick up. He then turns to his new friends and asks if they'd like to come along. Sorrel agrees as it's a priceless opportunity to further his research, and Verity does because she thinks at least one of them should be genuinely excited to meet Ho-Oh for non-nerdy reasons. With that, the group continues on, spending several days just travelling through the forest in search of the next town. One night, Verity stays up late, looking at the photos that she's been taking of the group and smiling to herself at the memories they bring up. She'd never expected Meowth to be such a skilled cook, but after the Scratch Cat had helped Sorrel with making dinner that first night, she'd been proven wrong. Ash is such a doting dad to Ruby, it's utterly adorable. She can see that the Zorua thinks the world of Ash. She continues to flip until she comes across a photo that she'd completely forgot she even still has. It's one of a woman with long blonde hair, an Empoleon, and a Piplup. A small, melancholic smile comes to her face as she stares at the woman in the picture. Suddenly, she's drawn out of her thoughts by a presence in front of her. Looking up, she sees Suicune standing on the other side of the small lake she's sitting at. For a moment, it looks over to where her friends are sleeping, then turns to face her. Their eyes meet and everything is still. Nothing moves, not even the wind. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, Suicune is gone. The next morning, Verity tells the boys about what happened. Smiling, Ash congratulates her on seeing the legendary beast that she'd most wanted to. Sorrel marvels at the luck of getting to see Suicune so soon after encountering Entei. Ash expresses skepticism. He points out that, according to the legend, Entei, Suicune, and Raikou were all given life by Ho-Oh, and they're currently walking around with one of its feathers. Sorrel asks if he thinks they're being drawn to the rainbow wing. Ask me again if we run into Raikou. Twice can be a freak coincidence. 3 times is a pattern. Verity laughs and says that Ash sounds a lot like her mother, and wonders what she would think of all this. Ash and Sorrel give her looks of confusion, and she explains that her mother is a famous Pokemon trainer and Legends enthusiast back home. Nothing she does ever seems to be good enough for her. The two haven't even talked since Verity left for her journey. Wanting to comfort her, Ash and Sorrel tell her that they think her mother would be very proud of her. And Verity, I'm sorry for, the jealousy comment. Don't be. You were right after all, and I was kind of asking for it by being so pushy. And just like that, the awkward atmosphere is broken as the two friends engage in a did-not-did-so argument. Sorrel and Meowth exchange looks of fond exasperation before shaking their heads. They can already tell that the two are going to be at this until the next town. Eventually, the group arrive at a town where they are able to restock on supplies and rest. While there, Ash and his Pokemon are able to engage in some lighthearted battles with some local and visiting trainers. During which, he discovers that Eevee has an egg move, Yawn, when she uses it to put to sleep a particularly tough Jigglypuff that was giving her trouble. That night, Ash decides that it's high time that he introduces his new friends and the newest member of his Pokefam to his mom. Delia is thrilled with the new addition, though she is concerned when she hears about how the group had found her. She asks Verity and Sorrel to not think poorly of Ash after seeing his anger, telling them that he may have a bit of a temper on him, but he has a big heart. They reassure her that she has nothing to worry about on that end, with Verity saying that she thinks Ash's reaction was completely warranted, and Sorrel telling her that if what it takes to make Ash lose his temper is for someone to mistreat and abandon their Pokemon, he thinks they'll be fine. Ash gives an uncomfortable laugh. The next day, Sorrel hits the library early in the morning, wanting to see if he can find anything about the Rainbow Wing. He's looking through a book detailing the legend when Verity and Ash walk in, having come looking for him. Seeing the book, Ash asks if Sorrel has found anything. Sorrel nods, telling the duo about the extra details that he's found in the book. About how, when the Rainbow Wing touches the heart of evil, it loses all of its colour. This reminds Ash of the night in the cave, and he fishes out the Rainbow Wing. It glows softly in his hand, the colours bright and vibrant. Hearing Ash mutter under his breath about how it looks fine, Verity rolls her eyes. Of course it's fine! Like your mom said, you might have a temper, but you've got a big heart. Ash scratches his cheek and thanks her, but he can't stop thinking about that night in the cave. Little do the group know that they're being watched not just by Team Rocket, but by someone else too. Later that day, Ash finds himself in a battle marathon where trainers try to beat each other's win streaks. At the moment, he's facing Snorlax with Meowth, and everyone in the crowd keeps whispering to each other about their unusual battle style. The duo keeps fusing moves, using two together to create something entirely different, even giving the fused moves their own names. So far, they've fused Thunderbolt and Dark Pulse to create Dark Thunder, and Iron Tail and Dark Pulse to create Shadow Iron. The other trainer, who's battling with Snorlax, is completely at a loss for how to counter these confusing attacks. Finally, Ash calls for a move called Charge Snow, and Meowth lets loose a Thunderbolt and Power Snow at the same time. Everyone watches in wonder as the snow becomes charged with the electrical energy of the Thunderbolt, causing the snow to spark like mini balls of electricity. The attack lands, shocking and freezing the Snorlax. With that, the Snorlax falls, defeated. Ash and Meowth fist bump, grinning broadly as the announcer calls their victory. The light mood is dashed, however, when a familiar face steps through the crowd, stepping up to be Ash's next challenger. Cross stands across the field from Ash, his face devoid of the smug arrogance that Ash had seen when they first met. Now, his expression is much more serious and guarded. He calls over to Ash, saying that he'd heard a rumour that Ash is now working with that Eevee. He tells Ash that he wants to see if there's anything to what Ash said back then, or if he's just all talk. Ash glares at him for a few seconds before turning to Eevee behind him, who has been staring at Cross in shock. Eevee, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. Eevee turns to him, her face uncertain, but then her eyes fill with determination and she jumps onto the field. Seeing her, Cross comments about how she still hasn't evolved and about how Ash is keeping her out of her Pokeball. He then pulls out a Pokeball which he says contains a Pokemon that he evolved using one of the stones that he tried to use on her. Tossing the ball, out pops a graceful fox Pokemon with white and blue fur, an Alolan Ninetales. The moment the announcer calls the start of the match, Cross calls for Ninetales to attack with Dazzling Gleam. In response, Ash tells Eevee to avoid it with Dig. With Eevee now underground, the attack misses completely. Ash fully expects Cross to make some snide comment about Ash and Eevee running away from the fight, but no such comment comes. Instead, Cross remains completely silent and focused. After a few seconds, Ash calls for Eevee to use Iron Tail. In an instant, Eevee bursts out of the ground directly underneath Ninetales, tail already encased in a metal-like sheen. The 4x super effective attack, combined with the earth and small rock fragments from the dig pelting Ninetales, sends her staggering back. Seeing the opening, Ash asks Eevee if she thinks she's ready to use the special move that they've been practicing. After receiving a firm nod, Ash calls for her to use Shadow Star. Everyone watches in awe as Eevee gathers energy in front of her, forming it into a ball of black energy and a cluster of stars that begin to orbit it. The Shadow Ball Swift combo is released and Ninetales dodges to the left, seeming to avoid the attack, only for the stars to turn around, pulling the Shadow Ball with them. The attack slams into Ninetales' back, sending her sprawling. Then, to Ash's shock, Cross raises his hand and forfeits the match. As the announcer calls the match, Cross returns Ninetales while Eevee bounds up to Ash, who kneels down to welcome her in for a hug. To further his shock and confusion, Cross walks right up to him, stopping only a few feet away, then makes a half demand, half request to let him travel with Ash and his friends. Ash, understandably confused and suspicious, asks why Cross would want to travel with them. Cross explains that he's been thinking about what Ash said last time, but he hasn't been able to figure out what he meant. Even if he had, he's never been able to believe anything he hasn't seen with his own eyes. That battle showed that Ash isn't the average trainer, so if Cross is going to figure out how he ticks, he's going to need to see him in action more often. Ash is silent as he mulls this over. Just being this close to the redhead is enough to set him on edge, and he's already having to fight the urge to punch him. It also sounds to him that Cross only wants to understand what Ash said in order to get better at battling. But it is worlds better than what Ash had been expecting from a second encounter. And whatever the motivation, the willingness to learn and understand is still there. With no small amount of uncertainty, Ash agrees, but only on two conditions. First, Cross has to apologize to Eevee for what he did to her. Second, he needs to keep his distance from Ash and his poker fam. At Cross's insulted expression, Ash holds up a hand halting any protests. He tells Cross that the second one is for his own safety, as Ash can't promise that he'll be able to restrain himself all the time. After a few seconds, Cross gives a stiff nod, then starts his apology to Eevee. Behind them, Team Rocket watches from their hiding spot in the bushes. This is the most interesting turn of events, and it could give them an opportunity in the future if things play out in their favour. The group, now with Cross, continues on their journey toward the Raikou mountain range, during which Cross discovers that not only does Ash consider the Pokemon that he's caught his family, but he doesn't even try to hide it. Treating Ruby and Eevee like sisters, though he sometimes treats Ruby like a daughter, simply by virtue of the fact that she sees him as a father figure, Pidgeot is often treated like the older brother/cousin of the group, and Meowth is always acting as the de facto adult of the group. Even when they train, Ash is always asking for their opinions and ideas, with Meowth as translator, acting less like a typical trainer and more like the captain of a sports team. He also spends hours each day brainstorming different ways to combine moves and ways to use them. Something that Cross thinks is more fitting of a coordinator than a traditional trainer. One night, while everyone is sitting down for dinner, he decides to finally ask, why does Ash act the way he does? Why does he treat his Pokemon like family and keep them out of their Pokeballs? The moment the question leaves his mouth, Ash feels his temper flare. He doesn't know why, but hearing that question come from Cross makes him want to punch something. He is about to tell Cross to mind his own business when Faraday and Sorrel join in the conversation, also curious to hear the reason behind it. While Ash is stuck in silent shock, unsure of how to now approach this situation, Meowth begins to snicker next to him. That would be my doing. Meowth then tells the group the story of how he and Ash met, prompting a little flashback from the two. Years ago, when Ash was only 6, he'd decided that he was going to go into the forest near Pallet to look for wild Pokemon. With the kind of bright-eyed enthusiasm and energy that only a child is capable of, he'd run into the forest with a bag full of toys, wearing shorts and a tank top with no idea of how to find his way back, with sundown only a few hours off. Suffice to say, the little adventure had quickly turned into a nightmare. As soon as it started to get dark, Ash had started trying to go back, only to find out that he was completely lost. Not only that, but dark storm clouds were starting to roll in with the rumble of thunder. The poor, terrified boy had continued to go through the forest until he heard the voice of someone shouting in pain. He ran toward the sound, half worried that someone was hurt, half hoping that it would be someone that could take him home. Pushing through the bushes, Ash found a Meowth covered in mud, scratches, and bruises, completely drenched, lying on the ground, groaning in pain. Running up to the Meowth, Ash kneeled down next to him, asking if he was alright. Meowth turned to him, eyes wide with shock. "What the heck are you doing in a place like this, kid?" Ash's eyes widened in shock at hearing a Pokemon speak a full human sentence, only to then fill with tears as he remembers why he's here. Meowth sits up in a mild panic at seeing the child about to burst into tears. "Oh, Archaeos, what did he say? Did him talking scare the kid?" "I'm lost!" Meowth jumped at the sudden wail from the scared kid, but quickly recovered. He patted Ash on the back, frantically telling him not to cry and that he'll take the boy home. Still sniffling, Ash looked at Meowth with hopeful eyes, causing Meowth to sigh in relief. At least the kid wasn't scared of him, and if he took him home, maybe he'd be able to find out which way Viridian was. Standing up, Meowth held out a paw, which Ash took without hesitation. Just as they were about to start moving, lightning cracked right over them and the sky opened up in a deluge of rain. Thinking fast, Meowth pulled Ash along as he ran to a nearby hollow tree. There, they took shelter, wet and shivering. While they waited for the storm to end, Ash had spotted several small local Pokemon just outside, eyeing the hollow fearfully. Wanting to help them, Ash reached out to them, offering for them to join him and Meowth inside the hollow. When all of the Pokemon were inside, Meowth noticed Ash's bag and asked if he had anything to dry himself with. Ash tells him exactly what's in there, and Meowth asks what Ash was thinking coming into a forest with nothing but toys and the clothes on his back. Ash tried to defend himself, saying that he wanted to find a Pokemon to be his partner when he becomes a trainer, and thought that a new friend would like to play together, so he brought his favorite toys. Meowth facepalmed at that before telling Ash that part of being a trainer is being responsible and thinking ahead. Let this be your first lesson, kid. Essentials first, then toys. Hours pass, and the two individuals that can actually communicate pass the time by talking and getting to know each other. Eventually, they fall asleep to the sound of rain, curled up in a cuddle pile with the other Pokemon to keep warm. The next morning, they woke to find that the storm had passed. Bidding farewell to the other Pokemon, Meowth began to lead Ash out of the forest. As they were walking, they were soon found by Officer Jenny and several other people that Ash recognized as his neighbors. Turned out that Deli had noticed her son's absence not long after he left, but thought that he'd gone to visit the Oaks. When it started to get late, she'd called them and found out that Ash actually hadn't gone there. She immediately rang Officer Jenny, and she got the whole of Pallet involved in the search party. They'd sadly had to put it on hold for a few hours because of the storm, but had started up again as soon as it let up. With Ash now in safe hands, Meowth had turned, intending to walk away, only for Ash to grab his paw, holding him back. Ash had all but begged for Meowth to come home with him, pointing out that Meowth was still covered in cuts and bruises. He also told Meowth that his mom would want to meet the Pokemon that saved him and give him a hero's feast. Enticed by the promise of food and medical attention, Meowth had gone with the little boy to Pallet. After that, Meowth had somehow ended up becoming the newest resident of the Ketchum family household. On top of that, he'd somehow managed to find himself in the position of surrogate father figure after Ash's father had gone off on his own Pokemon journey. The man has an even worse sense of direction than his son and often goes months without calling his family because he hasn't got a roto phone and he's gotten himself lost miles away from any Pokemon centers. The two family members smile as the memories drift away, bringing them back to the present. In short, I basically helped raise the kid. So, Pokemon are family? Not that hard to understand. Viridian Sorrel not an understanding, but Crustle frowns in confusion. There's one part of the story that he doesn't understand. He asks Meowth why he'd been in the forest in the first place. Why wasn't he already with a trainer? After all, he would think that a Pokemon capable of human speech would be invaluable to any trainer. In fact, how is Meowth able to speak in the first place, since he was clearly able to do it by the time he met Ash? Ash abruptly stands up, cutting off Cross from pressing any further. His whole body is tense and his eyes are shadowed, but it's clear that he's fuming. Hands clenched tightly into fists, he quickly turns away from the group, muttering some excuse before stalking off. The three 10-year-olds watch in utter bewilderment, while Meowth watches with a worried frown. Blinking, Verity wonders aloud how someone as kind and loving as Ash can have such a foul temper. She can't even see what Cross had done to upset him this time. Meowth heaves a sigh and tells them that that's because they don't know the whole story, and, in all honesty, it's probably Meowth's fault that Ash is so quick to anger when it comes to things like this. He won't tell them everything, as he hasn't even told everything to Ash, but he will tell them enough for them to understand. He explains to the trio that he wasn't born able to talk like a human. That was something he taught himself when he was what approximated a teenager by Pokemon standards. Before that, he was an ordinary wild Meowth. His earliest memory is of being in a basket full of old newspapers as a kitten, crying out in hunger. He would try to get food, only to be chased off or beaten up by the humans that caught him. He eventually found himself in PokeStar Studios, where he found what he'd hoped were friends, food, and someone he thought he could have a happily ever after with. He taught himself to walk and talk like a human just to please that person, but in the end, he was just rejected again. Not only by her, but by those that he'd thought were his friends. Before he met the Ketchums, he never knew what unconditional love and acceptance is. Don't tell him I said that. I never told him the whole story because I didn't want to scar the kid. But clearly, what I did tell him was enough to do that anyway. I think you can connect the dots from there. Ash breathes hard as he steps back from the tree that he'd just spent the last several minutes punching. His hands are bruised and slightly bleeding from the repeated blunt trauma, but he's finally managed to calm himself down. Still breathing hard, he sits down with his back against the tree as he tries to gather himself. As his breathing slows, he suddenly remembers the rainbow wing and quickly fishes it out from the pouch where he keeps it. Holding it up, he looks at it closely, wondering if his suspicion is right. Sure enough, the feather does not glow the same way it did in the library. The colors are still bright, but not quite as bright as they had been when he last looked at it. He was right. Some rainbow hero I turned out to be. He's pulled out of his thoughts by the sound of a branch snapping. Quickly, he shoves the rainbow wing back into its pouch before turning his head in the direction of the sound. As he turns his head, he's just in time to see Cross step out from around the tree. Spotting Ash, he startles a little before spotting Ash's hands, still bruised and bleeding. Frowning with a concerned look on his face, he sits down next to Ash and pulls a first aid kit out of his bag. Then, he turns to Ash and holds out a hand expectantly. Catching on quickly, Ash removes his gloves before holding his hands out to Cross. Without a word, Cross begins to treat the wounds on Ash's hands. It's a few minutes before Cross speaks. Meowth told us. After hearing that, guess I can't really blame you for what happened when we first met. The smile on Ash's face is pained as he listens to Cross. He can tell that he's being careful with his words, and figures it's because Cross is afraid of angering him. He says as much to Cross, as well as that he shouldn't have to be so careful around him, apologizing for the condition of staying away from him. Though, he honestly can't blame Cross for being scared of him. After all, I'm scared of me too. Before Cross can say anything, they're interrupted by Verity and Sorrel announcing the arrival of them and Ash's poker fam, with Verity telling Ash that that is the most ridiculous thing she's ever heard. There's a few seconds of silence as Ash and Cross stare at them in shock. Then, Cross snaps at the group that he told them to wait. Verity huffs with her arms crossed and replies that he'd said that he'd be back with Ash in 30 minutes. Ash remains silent as the two begin to argue, slipping his gloves over the bandages on his hands. Meanwhile, Sorrel also pays no mind to Verity and Cross and instead sets about starting a fire. A few minutes later, Cross and Verity have finished arguing, Sorrel has started a fire, and Ruby has fallen asleep in Ash's lap. Sorrel is the first to speak, saying that now that Verity and Cross have finished their argument, they should talk about what Ash had said just as they arrived. Ash shifts uncomfortably as everyone's attention is suddenly drawn back to him. Seeing how uncomfortable Ash is, Sorrel decides to tell the group about the Luxray that would take care of him when he was little, hoping that the parallels would help Ash feel more comfortable. He finishes his tale with how, after Luxray had died saving him, he'd been afraid to get close to any Pokemon. At least, until he met Lucario. Ash stares at the fire as he speaks, his voice uncharacteristically meek. He tells Sorrel that he was afraid of getting hurt, but Ash is afraid of what he'll do if he really snaps. Cross scoffs at the idea of Ash really doing anything too extreme, but Ash reminds him that he had kneed him in the stomach when they first met before continuing. He's scared that one day, this dark part of him will go too far, and he'll really end up seriously hurting someone. When he really gets mad, his mind just checks out and all he can think about is what they did. If he can't think clearly, then who's to say what he will do? How does he know he won't go too far? How does he stop himself? Cross reaches out and gives Ash's shoulder a firm squeeze, drawing his attention. If that ever happens, then we'll be right there to pull you back. He gives Ash a confident grin, which Ash returns with a small, grateful smile. Just as everyone is starting to relax, Eevee spots movement from the tree behind Ash. Turning to it, she's just in time to catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure sticking out of the tree, right where Ash's shadow is. Startled, Eevee lets out a cry, drawing everyone's attention. They all turn to see what had startled Eevee so much, the sudden noise and movement accidentally waking Ruby. Everyone is just able to catch a glimpse of something sinking into the tree, or Ash's shadow, they can't be sure before it vanishes. Ruby, upset at being so rudely woken up, tackles the tree lightly with some angry yips. Meowth looks at her aghast, asking where she learnt those words. Ash looks down at her disapprovingly. Clearly, they're going to need to have a talk about her language. Unfortunately, that conversation is going to need to wait, as Ruby's tackle has had the unfortunate side effect of knocking a Primeape out of its tree, and thus waking it up. The Primeape turns to the group, its eyes zeroing in on Ruby, who's the closest to the tree. It snorts as it is about to charge when Eevee jumps in its path. Standing her ground against the angry ball of fur, she gives a big yawn as the Primeape charges at her. It rears back for a punch, only to fall over in a dead sleep, knocked out by Eevee's yawn. Picking up Ruby, Ash suggests that they get out of here while it's asleep. Nodding in agreement, the group make their escape. Behind them, Team Rocket huddles in a bush. They had heard the entire exchange between the group, both before and after Ash ran off. This is certainly not the turn of events that they'd been expecting, but it did open a possibility for them in the future. If their original golden opportunity insists on losing its luster, then they'll just have to cover it up with some fool's gold. The next day, after crossing a river on Verity's Lapras, the group continues their journey. While walking through a particularly dense part of the forest, their attention is drawn by the distressed cries of a Pidgey. Turning to the sound, they see a Fearow attacking a small Pidgey with a yellow beak and feet, and a greenish tint to its feathers. Spotting the Pidgey, Pidgeotto immediately jumps in to protect it, startling everyone except for Ash, who adapts quickly. Calling out to Pidgeotto, Ash calls for him to use Steel Wing. Pidgeotto does, smacking the Fearow upside the head and sending it spiraling back. Not giving the aggressive bird any time to recover, Ash calls for Pidgeotto to blow it away with Whirlwind. As Pidgeotto flaps its wings to blow the Fearow away, the Fearow attempts to push through the wind. For a moment, it looks like it's going to succeed, but in that moment, Pidgeotto is enveloped in a blue-white light and his form becomes much bigger. The rest of the group watches in awe as Pidgeotto evolves into Pidgeot. With a much bigger wingspan, Pidgeot is easily able to blow fear away. Everyone breathes a sigh of relief as Pidgeot flies over to the shiny Pidgey. The two chirp happily at each other before Pidgeot leads Pidgey over to the group. Once they land, Pidgeot, with the help of Meowth, introduces Pidgey as a member of his old flock. In fact, she's the very Pidgey that the trainer had been trying to catch back then. Ash grins, glad that the trainer that had left a seriously injured Pokemon alone hadn't been able to get what he wanted in the end. Pidgey tells the group that the rest of the flock isn't far from here, and she'd gotten attacked by the Fearow after she'd gone looking for berries. She points in the direction that the flock is, and they realize that it's right along the path they're already heading. Now with Pidgey accompanying them, they continue on, soon finding themselves emerging from the trees into a clearing at the base of the Raikou mountain range. As everyone takes a moment to just admire the scenery, Ash notices that his feather pouch is glowing again. Pulling out the rainbow wing, he holds it up and it begins to shine brightly. Wincing slightly at the light, Ash points it towards the mountain range, hoping that it'll do something. Sure enough, a rainbow shoots out of the feather's tip, rising in a large arc before landing on the tip of a massive mountain in the distance. Sorrel identifies the mountain as the largest in the mountain range, Mount Tensei. Verity cheers, grabbing Sorrel's hands and jumping in excitement as he desperately tries to keep hold of his tablet. Ash watches this with a strange smile, unable to bring himself to share in their enthusiasm. Noticing this, Cross places a hand on his shoulder, asking if he's still worried about that corrupted rainbow wing thing. Ash just looks at the feather in his hand, and that's all the confirmation that Cross needs. He shakes his head and points at the rainbow wing, pointing out how vibrant the colours are. He highly doubts someone with an evil heart could make it look like that. With a final pat to Ash's shoulder, he walks over to get Verity to calm down before she breaks any of Sorrel's stuff. Ash stares at the rainbow wing for a few seconds, mulling over Cross's words. He gives a small smile before it's quickly replaced by a confused frown. When did they tell Cross about the corrupted rainbow wing in the legend? Jeez, he knew he should have stayed awake when they were telling him about it. It's approaching sundown when the group finally find a large flock of Pidgey and Pidgeotto roosting in a cluster of trees along the mountain range. Chirping joyfully, Pidgeot flies towards them with Pidgey. The flock all turn and take off from their trees, meeting the returning members halfway. Happy and excited chirps mingle together in a cacophony that not even Meowth is going to try to follow. Ash watches the reunion with a big smile, happy to see Pidgeot finally reunited with his family. And that's when it hits him, and his shoulders slump. Noticing the sudden change in Ash's mood, Verity asks him what's wrong. Ash gives a weak smile, not taking his eyes off the flock. You know, when Meowth and I first met Pidgeot, he'd been hurt and separated from his flock. I wanted to help him, so I offered to let him travel with us, so that he could look for them. It was only ever supposed to be temporary. Somehow, somewhere along the line, I forgot about that. This is Pidgeot's family. Verity, Sorrel, Cross, and their Pokemon stare at Ash sympathetically, while Eevee and Meowth wear their own despondent looks, and Ruby yips unhappily at Ash. Ash, getting the message without Meowth needing to translate, gently pats Ruby on the head. He tells her that he doesn't want to say goodbye either, but they can't force Pidgeot to stay with them. That wouldn't be right. He gently wipes away a tear from the baby's cheek and holds her close. As Pidgeot's friends, we need to send him off with a smile. Can we do that? Ruby nods solemnly against Ash's chest as she tries to stop her tears. All too soon, the flock starts preparing to leave, and Pidgeot glides down to the group. Taking a deep breath, Ash places Ruby on the ground before approaching Pidgeot, coming to a stop next to him. Looking up at Pidgeot's flock, Ash thinks back on all the time that he and his family have spent with Pidgeot. Half to himself, half to Pidgeot, Ash comments that he guesses this is goodbye. He turns to look at Pidgeot, telling him that he's glad that they met him, and thanking him for coming this far with them. Pidgeot blinks at Ash, seeming confused as Ash takes Pidgeot's ball from his belt, before dropping it to the ground. It bounces once before settling on the stone of the mountain path. Then, Ash lifts his foot before bringing it down, intent on crushing the ball under his foot. Almost too late, he sees Pidgeot's wing come in between the ball and Ash's foot, forcing him to hastily shift trajectory lest he stomp on Pidgeot's wing. The sudden shift nearly causes him to fall over, forcing him to take a few steps back in order to regain his balance. Once he's standing on his feet, he stares at Pidgeot with wide eyes as he gives Ash a stern and disappointed look, wings still shielding the ball. Utterly confused, Ash asks Pidgeot what he's doing, which he responds with a series of angry chirps. Meowth quickly translates, revealing that Pidgeot had asked what Ash thought he was doing and why he tried to break his ball. Ash swallows as he tries to keep it together. He'd wanted to get this over with fast. He wanted to send Pidgeot off with a smile, not tears. Forcing the tears back, he tells Pidgeot that he doesn't need his ball anymore. They found his flock, just like Ash and Meowth promised. Pidgeot nods slowly. Yes, they have found his flock, but that didn't mean that he was just going to leave just like that. Who will help Meowth keep them out of trouble? Who will carry Ruby around when Ash is tired and sore? But, Pidgeot, they're your family. Picking up his ball on his talon, Pidgeot hops over to Ash and fixes it back to his belt alongside the others. Looking Ash right in the eye, he gives a few soft but firm chirps. Tears sting Ash's eyes for a whole new reason now, as he wraps his arms around Pidgeot and buries his face in his feathers, as Pidgeot wraps one of his rings around him. He didn't need Meowth to translate that one. He heard the message loud and clear. There's a happy yip right before Ruby barrels into them, squeezing herself in between them to join in the hug. She's soon followed by Meowth and Eevee, though they join with a little less pushing and shoving. As the little family embraces, their friends look on, tears pricking the corners of their own eyes. They're pulled from their group hug by a cacophony of chirps from Pidgeot's flock. Turning, they see the whole flock moving in a pattern that Pidgeot explains as a feathered salute. It's the flock's way of showing gratitude and farewell to one that has done a great service to the flock. Slowly, the salute tapers off, and the Pidgey and Pidgeotto all turn to continue their own journey, giving chirps of goodbye. Smiling, the group waves the flock off, Ash promising them that he'll take care of Pidgeot. As the last of the sun's rays dip behind the mountains, so too does the flock. For a moment, it's quiet as everyone just takes in what happened, Ash feeling lighter and happier than he has in a long time. The moment is cut short when they feel a presence behind them. Turning around, they all see Raikou standing atop a pillar of rock, sparks of electricity flying around it. Before any of them can process this, Raikou lets off a series of lightning bolts, blanketing the area in light and forcing the group to shield their eyes. When they look again, Raikou is gone. It's official. It's not a coincidence. Sometime later, the group is walking through a particularly foggy part of the mountain range on their approach to Mount Tensei. As they walk, they can't help but notice the numerous wild Pokemon gathering at the cliffs surrounding them, putting them on edge. Verity asks Meowth if he has any idea as to what could be upsetting the wild Pokemon so much. But before he can answer, a voice they don't recognize answers instead, stating that the Pokemon have gathered in hope of gaining power from Ho-Oh. Turning to the voice, the group see an old man with a big bushy beard sitting on a rock near them. He jumps down and begins sniffing the air, claiming that he's able to smell Ho-Oh. Ash comments that that's the first time he's heard a human claim to be able to smell scents like a Growlithe, but pulls out the rainbow wing to show the man. The man recognizes it instantly, and Sorrel realizes that he must be the author of the book they read about the Rainbow Wing legend. The man tells them to call him Bungie, and explains that he's spent the last 20 years looking for Ho-Oh, and his search led him here. Verity offers for the man to accompany them, since they're on their way to see Ho-Oh too. Bungie happily accepts and looks closely at the Rainbow Wing. My, this is interesting. I've never seen a rainbow wing look like this before. I wonder what it could mean. At everyone's confused looks, Bonji explains that the rainbow wing is a reflection of the heart of the one that holds it. As such, the colours and glow of the rainbow wing are something like a language all its own, telling the story of its holder, who they are, not only in the moment but also deep down. He's discovered in his research that not only can evil drain the colours of the rainbow wing, but pain from the heart can too. And looking at the wing, he can see that painful emotions have touched it, but the light of love and compassion still shines true. He tells the group that he would be very interested in hearing about their journey here. So, as they continue their way to the summit, the group tells Bonji about their journey. Ash even tells them about the times that he noticed that the rainbow wing had lost some of its colour. Bonji nods along until the story is done. He then confirms Ash's suspicion about the rainbow wing drawing the legendary beasts to them before asking if they've noticed a guide from the shadows. Ash thinks for a moment before remembering the night when he'd first truly opened up to his friends. The Pokemon that had disappeared into his shadow. Bonji explains about Marshadow, its duty to observe and guide anyone with the rainbow wing, watching over them for any sign that the wing will become corrupted and lose its colour. If the rainbow wing does indeed lose its colour, it is Marshadow's duty to seal the rainbow wing's power away, ensuring that the corruption does not spread and consume everything around it. Cross places his hands on his hips and turns to Ash with a smug grin. See? I told you you had nothing to worry about. Ash rolls his eyes with a small smile. At that moment, the fog begins to lift and everyone is able to see the summit clearly. They're almost there. Ash's attention is then, once again, drawn to the pouch of the rainbow wing as the feather glows inside. Pulling it out, Ash holds it up and a rainbow shoots out of the end, arcing towards the summit where it emits a bright shine. Everyone watches in amazement as the crystals poking out of the mountain begin to glow with all the colours of the rainbow. Seeing this, Bonji quotes the section of the legend of the rainbow wing, which states that when the rainbow flower blooms, Ho-Oh will appear. Cross grins excitedly, asking why they're just standing here before grabbing Ash's hand and dragging him along the path to the crystals. Seeing his friend's enthusiasm, Ash can't help but laugh. Approaching the rainbow crystals, they quickly see a large cluster of crystals at the far end of the hall-like structure. Sorrel turns to Ash, telling him that he needs to place the rainbow wing at the top of the cluster. Pulling the feather out of its pouch, Ash begins to walk to the cluster with Meowth, leaving Pidgeot, Eevee, and Ruby with the others. They're just about halfway to it when they're forced to jump back to evade a poison sting. Everyone watches in shocked confusion as three figures jump to the top of the crystals, chanting what sounds like a poem. They jump down into clear view of the group at the climax of their performance, revealing themselves to be a man with blue hair and a woman with magenta hair wearing white uniforms with red R's on the tops, a Porygon beside them. Verity recognizes them as the members of Team Rocket from the Wanted poster at the start of this adventure. Angry to see members of that scumbag group again, Ash demands to know why they're here. Jessie huffs, waving her hand in a dismissing fashion, while telling Ash that they're not here to hurt his Pokemon, if that's what he's worried about. James pitches in, saying that they're actually here to help him. Ash scoffs at the idea, not buying it for a second. Jessie and James grin and tell Ash that he should be grateful. Ash caused their organization quite a lot of trouble when he interfered with the operation in Viridian Forest. But out of the kindness of their hearts, they've decided to put that aside in order to warn him about the Zoroark in their Maripurd. Unimpressed, Ash asks if they really expect him to believe them over his friends. Oh no, we would never expect you to just take us at our word. So we brought some video evidence. Porygon? Porygon's eyes begin to glow as it begins to play a memory in the form of a holographic projection. It shows Cross in the library where Sorrel had found the book on the Rainbow Wing legend. He's angry and saying about how he saw Ho-Oh just like Ash but hadn't been given the Rainbow Wing. He can't understand why someone like him, someone that's so soft on his Pokemon, was given it. The holographic Cross eventually decides that he's going to take the Rainbow Wing for himself in order to prove that he's the better trainer. However, the how is the problem. Their first meeting showed that Ash isn't afraid to get his hands dirty, so a direct confrontation would be a mistake. The hologram disappears, with Cross deciding to join Ash's group and wait for an opportunity to steal it, while Ash's guard is down. Ash turns to Cross. He's hopelessly confused, unable to even process what he's just seen. He knows that Porygon, due to being sentient programs, are able to show their memories to others, like playing a video file. But this couldn't be real, right? After everything they've been through, after coming this far, Cross was going to betray them? Cross is standing still, fists clenched and looking away from everyone. Ash tries to ask Cross what they'd just seen, to tell him that it's not true. His words are jumbled and fragmented from shock, but the question is still clear. Cross says nothing, not a single word in his defense. And that alone is confirmation enough. Ash takes a staggering step back, his eyes never leaving Cross as they begin to fill with hurt and betrayal. I thought you were my friend. That sentence seems to snap Cross out of whatever mental state he was in, and he tries to tell Ash that he is. Yes, he initially joined them because of the Rainbow Wing, but he gave up on stealing it a long time ago. He gave up on the Rainbow Wing because he didn't want to betray his friends. Ash doesn't hear a word. His mind is in a fog, and everything that Cross is saying sounds like static. All he can think about is what he's just seen. These three are the first people he's ever let get this close to him. He even told them his biggest fear. And one of them was planning on betraying them. In Ash's hand, the Rainbow Wing turns black and dark energy begins to emit from it. It travels up his arm, slowly enveloping it before continuing to the rest of his body. Verity, Cross and Sorrel all watch in shock and fear as their friend is encased in dark energy. From his shadow emerges a Pokemon that they all recognize. Marshadow leaps away from Ash, jumping to the top of one of the nearby crystal outcrops. There, it watches silently, its face uncertain. I trusted you. The black energy stretches out in the form of tendrils, striking at everything around it. Crystal cracks and shatters, rock gouged. Everyone watches in horror as Ash's eyes become glassy and empty, the dark energy from the wing completely consuming him. Watching this, Cross grits his teeth as resolve fills his eyes. He turns to the others and tells them that he has an idea of how they can help Ash. But in order to pull it off, he's going to need their help. Cross tells them that they need to get the Rainbow Wing out of Ash's hand. If he's not holding it, its control over him should break. Verity, Sorrel, and the Pokemon look at him skeptically, the reveal of Cross's original intentions still fresh. But then, Eevee steps forward to stand next to him, her eyes not once leaving Ash. With a series of yips, which Meowth helpfully translates, she tells Cross that he's changed since he joined them. She's seen it. He's warmer, kinder, and he smiles a lot more. His reasons for coming with them may have been less than honest, but he's not that person anymore. He's one of them. She trusts him. One by one, the rest of the group move forward to stand alongside Cross and Eevee. Sorrel asks what Cross's plan is, and he explains. They need to split Ash's focus in as many directions as possible, keep him distracted while closing the gap, and when one of them sees an opening, take it. Nodding in understanding, everyone prepares for battle, Cross calling out his Ninetales to help. With that, everyone charges, splitting up in multiple directions instantly, but staying within backup range of at least one of their friends. The dark tendrils lash out, intending to knock the offenders away, but they are able to dodge. Until Eevee takes a tendril to the chest. As she is sent flying, Cross runs to catch her before checking her injury. However, the blow barely left a bruise. With the damage they did to the surrounding environment, he'd expected at least a few broken ribs. That's when it clicks. The Rainbow Wing is a reflection of the holder. Of course the tendrils would never really hurt them. They were just trying to keep them away. With that realization, he calls on everyone to charge. Eevee is the first to move, followed quickly by Meowth and then everyone else. As she gets close, a tendril comes barreling toward her, intent on knocking her away. But Eevee holds her ground, refusing to back down from saving her family. She would fight and defend it to her last. In that moment, blue-white light envelops Eevee's form, which shifts and changes until the light bursts, and standing there is an Espeon. Invigorated by her evolution, Espeon bounds the last few feet, nimbly dodging the tendrils and using her newly unlocked confusion to hold them so the others can get through. As one giant mob, everyone throws themselves onto Ash in what could be considered a group hug. The sudden added weight knocks Ash over, causing him to lose his grip on the Rainbow Wing. As it drifts away from his hand, the black energy goes with it, causing his eyes to slip closed. Landing on the ground, everyone quickly detaches themselves and sits up, not wanting to accidentally crush him. A few agonizing seconds pass before Ash's eyes open to see everyone looking at him with worried expressions. Seeing Ash awake, Cross gives him a small, shaky smile. "Told you we'd pull you back." Ash smiles back gratefully as his Pokefam crowd in to hug him. Ruby nuzzles his chin, while Espeon licks his cheek, Pidgeot nudges his back, and Meowth patches his shoulder. There's a moment of silence as everyone catches their breath. Cross is the first to break it, saying that Ash had been right back then. He really was an idiot. It's no wonder Eevee couldn't evolve before. He wasn't giving her what she needed to do so. Before they can truly begin to relax, however, Marshadow jumps from their vantage point and moves to the Rainbow Wing, intent on sealing its power before it can cause any more damage. Spotting this, Ash attempts to warn it away from the corrupted feather, but it's too late. The moment Marshadow touches the Rainbow Wing, it is encased in dark energy, just like Ash had been. Turning to the wild Pokemon overhead, Marshadow sends a wisp of dark energy towards them, which causes their eyes to glow purple as energy surrounds them. Bungie explains to the children that Marshadow is controlling the Pokemon. With it being overpowered by the dark energy in the Rainbow Wing, it's likely that Marshadow intends to command them to attack the group. Everyone ducks out of the way, barely managing to avoid the Hyper Beam of one of the Nidoking. Taking cover behind an outcrop of rocks, they see Team Rocket also hiding there. They'd almost completely forgotten that they were here. Glaring at the three, Cross asks if they're proud of the mess they've made. Jessie attempts to defend themselves, saying that they had no idea that this would happen. They thought all that stuff about the Rainbow Wing getting corrupted was exaggeration. Ash breaks up the argument before it can go much further, saying that they don't have time for this. He turns to Bungie, asking if there's a way to neutralize the Rainbow Wing. Bungie thinks for a moment before saying that Ash needs to get it back from Marshadow. Ash's eyes widen as he immediately says that that's a bad idea, reminding the old man that he had been taken over by the Rainbow Wing's power himself not 5 minutes ago. Bungie acknowledges that Ash was overwhelmed by the hurt in his heart, but he was also brought back by his friends. With Ash's heart now at ease, it should be enough to purify the Rainbow Wing. Either way, it is the only shot they've got. Ash finally nods, accepting the plan, while his friends and family volunteer to hold off the other Pokemon so that Ash and Meowth can reach Marshadow. Team Rocket attempt to excuse themselves while wishing the group luck, only to be pulled back by Cross, Verity, and Sorrel. They tell the Crooks that they're not going anywhere. They caused this mess, so they're going to help fix it. As the Pokemon advance on the group, Ash places Ruby on Pidgeot's back, telling him to keep her as far away from the fight as possible, ignoring her yips of protest. He then turns to his friends, checking to see if they're all ready, while Team Rocket cower. As one, they all nod, then charge out from cover, dragging Team Rocket with them. Ash and Meowth run towards Marshadow, as their friends, family, and foes keep the wild Pokemon out of their path. Once they're close enough, Ash tells Marshadow to drop the Rainbow Wing. Unsurprisingly, Marshadow doesn't listen, instead launching a Shadow Ball at the two. In response, Ash tells Meowth to knock it back with Shadow Iron. Meowth does just that, sending the ball right back at Marshadow, who simply bats it away before charging at Meowth. Ash calls a warning to Meowth, who uses his still manifested Shadow Iron to block the Mach Punch aimed right at his head. Behind them, Verity, Sorrel, Cross, Team Rocket, and the rest of Ash's family try to hold their own against the wild Pokemon. At one point, a Nidoqueen attempts to blindside Cross and Lycanroc, only to be blasted with a Dark Pulse from above. Looking up in surprise, Cross can see Pidgeot gliding overhead while Ruby launches Dark Pulses and Shadow Balls at the Pokemon above and below them. So much for keeping her out of the fight. On the other side of the battlefield, Espeon finds herself cornered by a Magma, which is preparing a flamethrower. Glaring down at the possessed Pokemon, she braces herself for the attack, only for Magma to be sent flying by Ninetales. Turning to Espeon, she asks if she's alright, to which she nods. Then together, they rejoin the fray. Back over with Ash and Meowth, Meowth has just been sent skidding back to Ash's side by a particularly rough Force Palm. Ash asks if he's okay, and Meowth gives him a thumbs up. Smiling, Ash reasons that, based on the moves it's used so far, Marshadow is likely a Ghost type, a Fighting type, or both. So the best move for this situation would be Dark Thunder. Grinning, Meowth unleashes his signature fusion move, which does force Marshadow back a few steps. Ash and Meowth then watch in shock as the top of Marshadow's head and the scruff around its neck turns green and yellow energy, like focuser energy, surrounds it. Then it unleashes a series of Aura Spheres. Quickly, Meowth runs forward, attempting to close the gap while avoiding Aura Spheres, only he doesn't move quite fast enough and one of the spheres slams into him, then another and another. Seeing Meowth in the air, Ash calls out to him, telling him it's now or never. Dark Thunder! Summoning all his strength, Meowth blasts his fusion move at Marshadow as it charges right at him, leg extended in preparation for a close combat. There is a long moment where Ash doesn't even dare to breathe, watching as Marshadow somehow forces its way through Meowth's attack. Time seems to move in slow motion until Marshadow's foot connects with Meowth's face, breaking the attack and sending him flying. The clash of two attacks causes a shockwave that knocks Ash off his feet, sending him sprawling. Scrambling back to his feet, he looks over to where Meowth had been sent flying and sees him lying on the ground. Panic gripping his heart, Ash runs over to him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder, trying not to touch any of Meowth's obvious bruises. Painfully, Meowth forces his eyes open and turns to Ash. Through gritted teeth, he tells him to take cover. They're about to have company. Looking over his shoulder, Ash sees just what Meowth means. A section of the wild Pokemon have broken off from the main force and are advancing on them. Acting fast, Ash scoops up Meowth and tries to make a run for it, only to be backed up against a cliff. He tries to change direction, only to be blasted by a Nidoking's Hyper Beam. Ash's friends see this happen from their position and attempt to go aid him, only to be stopped by the horde of Pokemon still fighting them. Above, Pidgeot attempts to fly Ruby over to give air support, only to find the way blocked off by many Golbat. They're cut off. As the smoke clears, Ash and Meowth struggle to their feet. Looking from Ash to the Pokemon, Meowth steps forward and tries to gather enough strength to launch one more Dark Thunder. But a sudden wave of dizziness forces him to his knees as Ash dives towards him and the Pokemon launch another attack. Ash wraps his arms around Meowth, trying to shield him from the attack as they're blasted back. Forcing an eye open, Meowth looks at Ash sadly. "Run, kid. I can handle this." Ash looks at Meowth. He sees the myriad of cuts and bruises littering his body. There's no way Meowth can take another hit. With a heavy heart, he realizes what he needs to do. Speaking to Meowth in a voice barely above a whisper, he reaches for his belt. Behind him, the Pokemon prepare for a final unified Hyper Beam. "Meowth, you've always been there for me. You helped raise me. You taught me how to take better care of myself. You've always been there for me. Now, it's my turn." As soon as the words are out, he touches the old scuffed up Pokeball covered in stickers to Meowth's head. In an instant, Meowth's body turns into red energy and is pulled into the ball. He hears the blast of hyper beams behind him and holds the ball close to his chest, refusing to let go until the end. The attack hits, creating an explosion that can be seen for miles. Finally managing to break through the line, the rest of the team runs to where they'd last seen Ash, freezing as they see the cloud of dust where he'd been standing. As the dust dissipates, Meowth's ball rolls to a stop on the ground. There's a few seconds before Meowth pops out of the ball, already ranting about Ash sticking him in it, before he's cut off by Ash's hat landing on his head. Pulling it off, he looks at it in confusion before turning to see a sight not even his worst nightmares would have conjured. There, just a few short feet away, Ash lies on the ground, his body slowly fading away. Holding tightly onto Ash's hat, Meowth walks towards his kid, his steps shaky and stilted. "Hey, get up. Come on, kid. This ain't funny and you know it." Reaching Ash's almost completely vanished body, Meowth reaches out to place his hat back on his head where it belongs. But before it can even graze his hair, Ash completely vanishes. A little ways off, Marshadow looks down at its hand as the rainbow wing burns away to nothing with Ash's body. Meowth clutches the cap that had always been Ash's favourite with shaky paws, memories of his time with Ash flashing through his mind. Of the time Ash asked him to come home with him, of when he'd told Ash about his painful past, of telling Ash various old legends during nights when he couldn't get to sleep, of when he tied up Ash and Gary and stuck them in a room, telling them that he wasn't letting them out until they worked out whatever the heck was going on between them. The first day they started their journey, when they met Pidgeot, Ruby and Espeon. His vision blurs as tears well up and fall down his cheeks. He holds the cap to his chest, clutching it like a lifeline. Black energy and yellow electricity sparks around him as he feels everything build up. With an agonized scream, he unleashes the biggest dark thunder he's ever produced, blasting Marshadow and its army of wild Pokemon away and blanketing the whole area in purple-black lightning. A stray bolt hits Team Rocket, sending them blasting off. When the light fades, the wild Pokemon look around in confusion, having been restored to normal by the shock to the system and the lack of the rainbow wing. Meowth pays attention to none of it, sobbing into the cap that is all that remains of his kid. Ash. Ash opens his eyes a crack as he begins to wake up. Then, seeing the area around him, they snap open. Standing up, he looks around in slight fear. This looks like Mount Tensei, where he'd been fighting Marshadow with Meowth, but all the colour is gone. The whole world is in grayscale, and it's giving him the creeps. To add to his unease, he can't see his friends or any of his family. Nervously, he calls out their names, hoping to hear them answer. Meowth's ear twitches and he looks up. There's no one there, but he's sure he heard it. Taking a half step forward, he softly calls his name. Ash turns quickly. There's no one there, but he knows he heard it. He takes a step forward and the world around him is enveloped in light. When it's gone, he finds himself standing in a very familiar place. Route 1. The world is in colour again, but his own body is still washed out. He pays it no mind as he hears Meowth's voice call out his name again. Paying no mind to the rest of the world, he begins to run, following that call. Meowth watches in awe as orbs of golden light begin to gather in front of his eyes. Pidgeot lands beside him, allowing Ruby to jump down from his back as they stare at the light. Pidgeot chirps, telling Ash that he needs to come back. Ruby yips, tears in her eyes, calling for her papa to come home to them. They're then joined by Espeon, who joins her own voice to the call, telling Ash that they're right here. He needs to come back to them. Meowth gives a watery smile. Our family ain't complete without you, kid. Ash picks up speed as he hears first Pidgeot, then Ruby, then Espeon call out to him along with Meowth. He needs to go back. He follows his instincts, following the voices of his family calling out for him, trusting that they'll lead him home. Around him, the scenery changes, reflecting various places that he'd been on his journey, but he pays it no mind. His focus is entirely on one thing: getting back to his family. The orbs glow and merge together, creating a solid plane of light. The Poke fam stare intensely at the light as their friends approach, watching in awe as the plane glows brighter. Meowth nearly drops the cap in his hands as the light shifts, becoming something like a doorway. And, looking through it, he, Pidgeot, Ruby, and Espeon all see the same thing. There, at the other end, is Ash, running towards them. Smiling in pure joy, the family all jump through the light, finding themselves falling through the sky towards Ash, who looks up to see them. Bending his knees, Ash jumps with all his might. Meeting his family halfway, they embrace, Ruby and Meowth in his arms, as Espeon drapes herself across his shoulders and nuzzles his cheek, and Pidgeot wraps his wings around him from the other side. As they hug, colour returns to Ash's body, that this is barely noticed by anyone. Ash's friends watch in amazement as the light shines bright then dissipates, leaving behind a small family that, for a moment, had seemed forever broken. Ash stands in the center of his family as they hold each other, not willing to let go just yet. Eventually, however, they do separate, allowing their friends to rush in to welcome Ash home. The moment is ruined, however, when Meowth sticks his claws into Ash's arm. With a yelp of pain, Ash rounds on Meowth, demanding to know what that was for. Giving Ash the look only a disapproving parent is capable of, Meowth tells him that was for giving him a heart attack. He tells Ash that he is to never do that again. Ash is about to argue back when he notices some light gathering around his hand. Holding it up, he watches in shock as the rainbow wing begins to manifest in his hand, its colour completely restored. Bonji recites the prophecy again, then tells Ash to place the rainbow wing. Climbing up the crystal structure, Ash places the rainbow wing at the top. Everyone watches in wonder as the feather floats a little above the crystals before there's a flash of light. Then, a rainbow begins to stretch from the crystal towards the horizon. In the distance, they can see Ho-Oh flying towards them. Soon, it is soaring over them as light rains down from its wings. As the light touches them, they feel all of their wounds heal. Ho-Oh perches on top of the crystal cluster, looking down at the group. Cross turns to Ash and asks what he intends to do now. It's at that moment that everyone finds out that Ash actually hadn't figured out what he was going to do once he met Ho-Oh. Exasperated, Verity berates Ash for not thinking ahead. Ash counters by reminding her that the only reason he went looking for Ho-Oh was because it challenged him to. So he figured that Ho-Oh would have something in mind itself. Cross steps forward intending to break up the fight, but is stopped by Sorrel, who tells him to just let the children sort it out themselves. Around sunset, the group walks into a Pokemon Center at the base of the mountain range. Walking up to the counter, Ash and Cross ask Nurse Joy if she can heal their Pokemon. Seeing the scruffy appearance of the trainers and their Pokemon, she asks if they were having a battle. They say they were, and she asks if it was against each other again. They say no and tell her that this time it was a tag team battle against Ho-Oh. This earns them one very confused look. The next morning, everyone gathers outside the center. Cross stands in front of the rest of the group, his Lycanroc by his side. He's decided that it's time he continued his own journey. He holds out his hand to Ash, who takes it with a smile. I'm proud to have met you, Ash, and even prouder to call you my friend. Feelings mutual. With that, they part ways. However, that is not the only parting of the day. A little later, the rest of the group come to a fork in the road. There, Sorrel tells them that he's going to be going down the right path. He's heard rumours of the legendary birds being spotted in that direction, and they'd be the perfect next subjects for his research. Verity tells the boys that she's going to be taking the path to the left. She thinks it's time she visited her mother. But before they part, she wants to know, has Ash found an aspiration yet? Smiling, Ash shakes his head. He hasn't, but he's not giving up yet. There's still plenty of world left to see out there, and there's still plenty to learn. With that, the group part ways, with the promise to one day meet once again. And that, everyone, is the end of our story. I hope you enjoyed this What If special. Let me tell you, going from videos that average 2,500 to 3,000 words to a script that is 20,000 was quite the experience. But I'm very proud of how it turned out. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm Rune. See you in the next story.
Just like the waves across the sea, we were strong, wild and free. Oh, how we laughed, how we cried, our voices echoed through the night. Nothing mattered in this world except you and me. Though the days can pass me by, I'll not forget. 'Cause when we meet again, it's like you never left. 'Cause that's when home comes to you. It doesn't matter where you are, some things are always true. There are those that leave a mark upon your heart you'll never lose. 'Cause that's when home comes to you. And as the years go marching on, the bonds that formed are just